Ariel Cohen is a senior fellow and managing director of the Energy Growth and Security Program at the International Tax and Investment Center based in Washington, D.C. And he's also a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. Senior fellow. Thank you very much. We very much appreciate that you traveled from Washington, D.C. to be here with us today. You recently published a report on water insecurity and all the challenges in Central Asia. And in your report, you argue that regional and international cooperation really is essential to deal with the current challenges. And I was wondering, what is needed to make this happen? Could you share something about this in your opening statement? And then after that, we'll open the floor also for questions. If you have any, please think ahead already and raise your hand as you want to ask them, and we'll make sure the microphone comes your way. Ariel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I want to thank Clingendael and personally Neil Drost for organizing an excellent, timely, and highly relevant conference on a topic that doesn't get enough attention: water. I want to stress that I'm in this business for 30 plus years. There's a high level of speakers and the younger people, to see younger people covering the topic of water and in the international context on an area that in today's world with China, Russia, Ukraine, Iran is not the top priority area. It's very important. And I'm privileged to be a co-sponsor and an organizer of this conference. ITIC, International Tax and Investment Center, is a nonprofit. We are in business since 1993, working in a large number of countries, primarily outside of my program on tax policy and investment policy, including in Central Asia. Our President Dan Witt worked on a tax code of Kazakhstan, a tax code of Russia in the 90s, and is very active in Africa, very active in Indonesia and other Asian countries, and in Central Asia and Caucasus. In fact, last week he spoke in Tbilisi on a big conference. So ITIC is front and center in Central Asia and on major topics of international development. Thank you for mentioning our report, the West's role in solving Central Asia crisis. The report is published in November by the Atlantic Council. We presented it in February of 25. But since November, the world already has changed a lot. In the report, we're talking about USAID as one of the leading agencies to support water policy and water issues amelioration in Central Asia. I would not go as far as advocating that. I would stress, though, that Central Asia is facing probably the most important developmental and environmental crisis in the realm of water. Luckily, the two main spokespeople and leaders of the two biggest countries, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, both spoke very clearly about the necessity to address the water crisis. And President Tokayev put the appropriate government agencies to deal with the crises. President Mirziyoyev said, we are facing a shortage of water. The population of Uzbekistan is growing fast. Population of some other countries in the region is growing fast. There's a lot of industrialization, and we're still in modernization and industrialization in Central Asia. These are not postmodern societies like some of the places we live. These are modernizing societies. And in the modernization, we talked about agriculture, we talked about Bitcoin mining. We're talking about industrial production. It requires gigaliters of water. Where is it going to come from? And in our report, we are addressing several issues. One, Central Asia is not a country. It's 5 countries, plus Afghanistan. I would like to address Afghanistan a bit further in my discussion, but the idea of countries working together after their independence originated in the 1990s. It's not a new idea. It originated with the first president of Kazakhstan, Nursultan Nazarbayev, and he reached out to Uzbekistan. And unfortunately, the then president Islam Karimov, anxious to build or rebuild, recreate a nation, Uzbekistan was very anxious about not getting into regional cooperation. But the vision of Central Asian cooperation, coordination, and eventually some kind of Central Asian Union was initiated by Nazarbayev and articulated by him many, many times. And today, President Tokayev, President Mirziyoyev, and others are working on building more and more cooperation, which is great. And the water issues, when the water goes from Afghanistan, from the mountains of Tian Shan into Amudarya and Sirdarya, and then, unfortunately, is overexploited to the point that we have a catastrophe of the Aral Sea on our hands. In the report, we break down where this water goes and which canal and in which country, et cetera, et cetera. You can see it. But the point is that infrastructure is old. This is Soviet-era infrastructure. So you have ridiculous things like the Karakum Canal not coated. So when they dug it, the water went into the canal, but it's not preserved in the canal. It can dissipate into the sand or into the ground, and you can lose a lot of that water. The canals are not covered. So if you cover them and you pave the cover of the canals, and these are hundreds and thousands of kilometers, with photovoltaic energy generation batteries, that changes the picture quite a lot. It's not done. The old pipe system is rusty, leaking, and in many places, unfortunately in Kyrgyzstan, we give an example, they take money from international donor community, do something, and then still when you audit these projects, you see that this money did not provide 100% efficiency, to put it mildly. So on the organizational level, on the audit level, on the implementation level, a lot can be done to increase efficiency of these investments. So how these investments can occur and where they can come from. You saw in December, President Macron of France, I mean, we're in Europe, Europeans are very involved with Central Asia on a number of issues. We do, our program is called Energy Growth and Security, so we do a lot of energy. On oil and gas since the 90s, on uranium, Kazakhstan is probably second largest country in the world in terms of deposit and probably the #1 exporter of uranium. I am a believer in nuclear renaissance. I'm not in Germany, I'm allowed to say that. If we want zero emissions, we need nuclear reactors, whether these are conventional big reactors or small modular reactors. And you know, there are 80 designs of new reactors. Of course, not all 80 will survive, but it's new technology. Uzbekistan did cut a deal for 2 units. Kazakhstan is putting 2. There's some rumor about, I heard 3 big reactors. The short list includes Russia, China, and Korea. People live in the neighborhood they live. Russia, China, Korea, South Korea has a pretty decent reactor that they exported. So you see the nuclear renaissance comes to Central Asia as well. But specifically on water, the One Water Summit in Saudi Arabia in December, I mentioned President Macron and President Tokayev co-chaired the water summit in Saudi with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Just recently, April 3rd and 4th, in Samarkand, my birthday, they had a EU Central Asia summit with Ursula von der Leyen, with Antonio Costa, the president of the European Council, and President Mirziyoyev and other presidents. And water was front and center in this summit. But as somebody pointed out very, very correctly, I think this was our speaker from Tashkent just now, the gap between declarations and sometimes even decisions and implementation, this is a characteristic gap of any country. You go to United States, you go to Russia, you go to any country that works on implementation of policy, and you find that this is a very common problem. So yes, with trillions of dollars of value disappearing from American stock exchanges, we are in an environment that is staring in the face of a global recession. I hope I'm wrong. I hope we won't have a recession, but it may happen. Nevertheless, there is money in this world, and the money mostly is mobilized and distributed by international donor community, be it the World Bank, ADB, European Bank for Reconstruction of Development, Asia Development Bank, the Chinese big banks. And in theory, that money, billions and tens of billions of dollars, can be directed to Central Asia in cooperation between the governments of Central Asia, because you need a muscle, high-level government interaction, right? I studied in this business in the 1990s. I designed a World Bank intervention on education for legal reform in Russia. Don't ask me how that went. And then I worked in Georgia also. So I worked with the donor community. I consulted the World Bank. You have to be very specific. The implementation unit has to be staffed by competent, hardworking people like yourselves. So that money is not wasted, it's not stolen, it doesn't go into pockets of the bureaucrats, and it does what it's supposed to do. So in my paper, in the presentation, I'm thinking about a green C5+1, when the summits are focused on environmental issues, on water. With who? US still, and with the US today, you need to talk in terms of business. How American companies can bring technology, whether it's irrigation, drip technology, whether it's smart water meters, how American companies can make money. This is a message from the Trump administration. Green EU, C5+1, following up on the Samarkand summit. Holland, it has centuries of water management experience. My big hobby horse, if you want to know, you don't have to be interested in what I think. I think cotton is way overrated, and everybody will be better off wearing synthetics that last longer than cotton, that can be tweaked to evaporate better than cotton. Why do you need all this cotton, and especially not in an area that is so thirsty for water, like Central Asia? You can replace cotton with fruits, nuts, vegetables. There are huge markets all over the world, and Central Asia is already exporting very high quality fruits vegetables and nuts. So this can be replaced. Then these open canals are a disaster. Modernization of water distribution networks can be sped up. Altogether, between modernization of agricultural water usage, switching agricultural cultures, and human consumption modernization with meters and better quality networks, you can save 40 to 50% of water, which puts you in a whole different position. That acute shortage is going to be addressed if you do all that, and it can be done. Beyond that, can we stop the climate change? I'm not so convinced anymore. You have to have a commitment that is lacking. So then you start thinking in terms of adjustment. Every degree of Celsius of temperature in Central Asia will cost billions and billions of dollars in damage. Can you bring water from Russia, for example, in canals or in pipes? Not in today's environment, but maybe in the future. These were ideas in the Soviet times of bringing massive amounts of water from the huge Siberian Russian rivers. And I saw two of them, the Ob and the Lena. These are gigantic, gigantic rivers. So there are long-term visionary solutions that we're not there yet. But today, in cooperation between the countries, cooperation of Central Asian countries in particular, and how do you get Afghanistan to cooperate? I have no idea. What I do know, that the drying rivers of Central Asia, Amu Darya and Sir Darya, are suffering from, Amu Darya in particular, suffering from Afghanistan trying to do something they're not equipped to do, which is building that canal that is 15, 20, maybe more than 20% of the water. So they are contributing to a crisis in Central Asia. And then the question is, who can influence them? It's not Europe, it's not the US, it's China, it's the Gulf countries, especially Qatar, that has a lot of money and a lot of influence in Afghanistan. This is absolutely necessary intervention that needs to happen yesterday to help Uzbekistan and other countries around the Aral Sea. I think I ran out of my time. Thank you very much.
No, I think, Ariel, if you're coming all the way from Washington, D.C., you're allowed to run out of time slightly.
I think that you have to have institutions. These are complex, very complex projects, the transnational projects that some of them will require billions of dollars. And to do it just on a handshake and just on informal personal relations, which is very typical of the post-Soviet environment. The chemistry, the handshake, the kickbacks, this is not the way to go. And my concern is less about Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. These are two countries that sort of, with problems, are moving into real statehood. My concern is this hyper-authoritarian, in case of Tajikistan and Turkmenistan, and unstable, problematic small countries. I'm talking about Kyrgyzstan. So the lack of institutional capacity is extremely pronounced in the three smaller countries. And two out of these three smaller countries are very important because these are net exporters of water. These are Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. The mountainous countries, the glaciers are slowly shrinking. They're building more hydro capacity. And the bigger countries are dependent on them. And for now, when you read people say, oh, there was a clash between Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, it was a clash about water. But if you look around the world, Egypt and Ethiopia, because of the big Ethiopian dam, are seriously thinking about a military confrontation. And there's a race in the Horn of Africa with different countries sort of putting chips with different countries in the area. So it becomes a potential prescription for a regional conflict. Very disconcerting. So I hope and pray, because I love Central Asia, hope and pray that people will have, better judgment, but you do this through regional institutions. And that is the direction Kazakhstan was advocating since the 1990s. While I agree that when we are analyzing and addressing these issues, it is very appropriate to put responsibility on the shoulders of the decision makers in the region. I am also cognizant, probably because of the book I wrote called Russian Imperialism, and looking at the collapse of the Soviet Union and looking at the Russian Empire. Look, these are post-colonial spaces. And the influence of the metropolis in Moscow is still there. And if you look at the disparity of power, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I look at power in international relations also. Right? I'm a realist. And you see the disparity of power, let's say, between China and Central Asia. You can see all the levers of power, be it in case of Kazakhstan. How do you export oil, which is your number one export commodity, through Russia? Something happens, oops, 2 terminals out of 3 in Novorossiysk are not working. Oops, this pipeline is being shut down. In case of China, oh, you won't do this? We're going to shut down this investment project, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of power. These former colonial metropolis in Moscow and the emerging global center of power in Beijing can exert on this region. Luckily, for the topic of our discussion, water is kind of a neutral, warm and fuzzy issue. And you're absolutely right. I looked up very briefly the role of cotton in the production of explosives. It is significant and it's tragic, but yeah, the demand is there. And there was a question about institutions also. Yeah, just one word about institutions. It's not that Russia or China are against international institutions. They're just in favor of their own institutions. I can recommend to you a report by Sergei Karaganov, Dmitry Trenin, and one other co-author out of the New School, Высшая школа экономики, Higher School of Economics for 23. They're openly saying, we are going to use BRICS and Shanghai Cooperation Organization to bring any and all countries away from the West. So yeah, their institutions are important to them, okay? Can any of these be instrumental in water improvement and development? Yes. I mentioned them. Asian Development Bank, EBRD, if it's a World Bank funded project, World Bank, et cetera, and as much as Central Asian countries can stand up their own institutions, those can be also efficient. And by efficiency, I mean, yes, transparency, good governance, audits, et cetera, et cetera.
So I'd like to kindly ask the speakers, give you the opportunity to share in 2-3 sentences your takeaway message. What really should be the takeaway message for today? Ariel, may I start with you?
Well, I had 2 fingers to what the colleague just said, and I bring it based on my interaction with some of the diplomats from the region. When we did this report on water, they said, oh, you cannot possibly advocate for the private sector solutions in the water sector. I said, why? Oh, because water, and this was a relatively young person, a person probably your age. Oh, water is, people don't understand that water is from God and it's a public commodity. If you want waterworks to work, you have to bring private sector expertise and has to be a profit motive in this. Otherwise, it'll be state-owned or municipal and it won't work well. So what's fascinating in this whole area is how we, in this conference, talked about the necessity of interstate cooperation, government commitment, and I would add now private sector commitment. And the modernization of the water sector we're talking about that will bring tens of billions of dollars into the region. If these are the investments, be it from international government banks or the private sector, it has to be clear-cut, transparent, well-managed, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a huge sector, and I sincerely hope, for the sake of Central Asian countries and peoples and the population, that in some cases is suffering tremendously. You saw the pictures. People don't have a pipe with the running water. It has to be done. It has to be done quickly. We are running out of time. Thank you.